Hello and welcome to Ask the Expert. My name is Grace Kirkley and I'm a marketing analyst at DQ. And it's my pleasure to introduce Allen Hoffman, Senior Accessibility Program Consultant at DQ. Welcome, Allen.
Hello.
My first question for you is, what does equal access or accessibility mean to you?
So for me, accessibility is very broad, but in my work history, I have focused primarily on digital accessibility. But to me, what accessibility covers is to be able to live independently, to be able to have mobility, as in, transportation and get around generally independently, have the ability to receive and take education, have the ability to have a job and employment. And then things that, seem a little external to work, but shopping, entertainment, things like that. When you go shopping, it's nice to be able to have more than one choice of one thing that's accessible, and the same with entertainment. And also have access to social activities. So in general, I just expect things that they should just work, except now and then when there's a minor bug somewhere, and then that gets fixed in a reasonably short period of time, as opposed to just staying broken forever. So that's kind of how I look at accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. And it's simple and straightforward when you put it that way, yet we know that it's not always simple in practice. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to achieving equal access?
To me, the biggest challenge is getting and keeping senior leadership buy-in and priority on accessibility. The reality is that senior leaders in organizations tend to change faster than the time it takes to make accessibility become part of business as usual. And that can be a real problem. Accessibility takes culture change. People that aren't used to doing something and now you want them to do it, that requires change. And that's, a culture change from not thinking of accessibility to considering it throughout their everyday work. Accessibility doesn't happen overnight. And when those leaders change so fast and the new one coming in may not have the same priorities as the last one, in a lot of cases, they definitely don't have the same priorities. Or by the time they come up to speed and remember they're supposed to be doing accessibility, the priority has disappeared. And without that senior leadership priority on accessibility, the reality is all the other priorities and everyone in their organization's day-to-day work will take over, and accessibility will get pushed down that priority list significantly or completely off the list. So an example is you could insert accessibility into your development process, but if you have senior leadership who come in and don't feel it's a priority, then the stuff for accessibility will tend to remain on the backlog. It won't get addressed. Everything will push it off. So just having it in your things to do doesn't mean it's going to get done. And for people doing accessibility, this is a really frustrating problem of that constantly shifting and losing that priority. And in my experience, in some cases, it's a real cause of burnout for accessibility champions. So just the reality is that if we do get senior leadership buy-in over a significant period of time, people with disabilities will notice. They'll notice the difference. All of a sudden, the products are accessible. They stay that way. They can buy one. They can rely on it. They don't buy it, and then the next round, it's inaccessible. And people with disabilities notice, and they notice when the other in reverse, when it's only short-term attention to accessibility. Again, people with disabilities are pretty sharp, and they remember that stuff. And it takes time for organizations to gain that trust for people with disabilities. And you can't do it overnight. It's got to be sustained over a period of time to get people with disabilities to be able to trust that your company or your products will work for them.
Right, absolutely. Like you were saying, sounds like there's a lot of whiplash that can occur within an organization, right? There's accessibility is being prioritized and then it's not. And that priority shift is intensely felt, I would imagine, by people with disabilities and people in the accessibility field.
In my history in the government, this was a continuous thing. Leadership change is very short term in the government, but we see it in industry the same amount. And without calling out companies, there's a few really big examples of where accessibility became a priority and it really worked. And there's a few examples, and in cases, some of them the same companies where they had priority and then it disappeared. And in one case for like 20 years, but then it
Wow.
came back and it's been maintained for the last, 15, 16. And for customers, just building that trust, if you buy a product and it just doesn't work very long, you're pretty much not going to buy that again. But if it breaks and the company takes care of it and fixes it, you can have a lot of trust that, okay, there might be a problem, but it'll get taken care of and I can keep using the product. And so that's part of the thing. It's got to be top down priority on accessibility over a long period of time. Overall, that is the biggest challenge of all in getting accessibility done out there. It's not really a technical challenge. It's just priority.
Now, you've been in the federal government and also in industry, and both have been part of many milestones in the accessibility field over time. Looking back on your experience, what's a favorite event or progress marker that really sticks out to you?
Well, as far as an event, I did get to attend the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act at the White House when I was a brand new federal employee clear back in 1990. And I don't even think I quite realized the importance then. But over time, I've realized, wow, that was a pretty neat opportunity to be in. And the ADA has provided a real foundation for accessibility, and not just in the U.S. but across the world as a model. Then the other thing is that I'm going to just say the release of the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act in 2001, and then the subsequent update in 2017, for me, were both huge sort of mile markers for accessibility. Section 508 established accessibility to be a scope of it was wider than just a web page. For a lot of people, that's all accessibility is, but there's a lot more to it. There's desktop software, mobile apps, documents, even hardware interfaces like your TV or your printer. 508 initiated the federal government's accessibility transformation. Regardless of how far they may or may not have gotten in the last 19 years, the Section 508 release is what really has at least established it as one of the priorities in the government. Section 508 set a marker out there for industry that accessibility can be important and can be a financial importance. People do pay attention to making money, and that was one of its primary strategies in Section 508 is to affect the purchasing habits of the federal government, which has something like $60 billion IT budget. It really was a good thing for people with disabilities to know that there was some law supporting them inside and outside the federal government. And it provided a legal reason for federal agencies to establish accessibility programs. Even though it's an unfunded mandate, there's nobody just saying, okay, we have to pay for 508. They had a responsibility to do it. And then finally, one of the things that I know is going on of late that is a milestone is, and some people look at this as a negative, but I look at it as an indicator of success, is there's more legal actions around accessibility. And, again, most people think that's terrible, but the reality is that if you have a customer service and you take in 100,000 customer calls a year and only 50 of them relate to accessibility, it's not going to rise to your notice. That's just the reality. It doesn't bubble up. And those legal actions at least get the attention brought to where it needs to be so that it's not dependent on statisticals of help desk support and things like that. And so I look at the increase in the legal actions actually as a good thing. It's kind of I had people tell me, nobody's complaining, then why should we do anything about it? Well, that's what the legal actions do. There's other ways to do it, but if you've been discriminated against or had lack of accessibility for years, eventually you're just going to run out of patience and say, that's it, I'm going to do something about this. And the legal action is one way they can do it. I would recommend to companies, if they do have a legal action, not to look at it as just a negative cost, but to look at it as their opportunity to come to terms with accessibility overcome their existing accessibility debt and gain trust with that community of people with disabilities who apparently want to buy their products. Look at it as a positive instead of a negative.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to phrase it, that it's an opportunity to reframe things and an opportunity to, like you said, regain that trust of your consumers and um, come back with integrity and say, we weren't doing a good job and we are dedicated now to fixing it and to improving ourselves as an organization and to provide a better service and better products for our consumers.
I can't agree more.
You mentioned in the recent blog post you wrote on history of Section 508 that you were in the advisory council actually to update the Section 508 standards. Can you recap briefly again what Section 508 is and talk about what kinds of things you may have deliberated on in the council?
So, okay, I will start with the Cliff's Notes of Section 508. So, Section 508 refers to a section in the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's been updated a few times, and it has to do with the accessibility of the name now is information and communication technology. So, that could be websites, documents, printers, desktop, mobile software across the board, electronic information technology. And the basic premise behind Section 508 is that when the federal government develops, procures, maintains, or uses information and communication technology, that it provides comparable access to people with disabilities as that provided to others. You know, it's kind of a long sentence, but there's a lot involved there. The enforceable part of it is that primarily around the procurement, it's implemented in the federal acquisition regulations. And it really comes down to that when the government's buying information and communication technology, that they pick the product which best meets accessibility requirements and their needs. But their needs come first. So if you're buying a printer or a bunch of printers and three products meet your needs, you should look to the accessibility level of those products and pick the one that's most accessible. That's the basic concept of Section 508, and it's based on a set of standards that various types of products or various functions must meet. So that way people can have a level competition field when they're bidding on federal acquisitions. And it gives the people that are making those acquisitions a way to, you know, basically compare and contrast, not do apples to oranges, but do apples to apples. Things that the refresh of the Section 508 standards started clear back in 2006 and took all the way till 2017. It started with an industry advisory council, which took many meetings over a couple years, came up with recommendations, and then the U.S. Access Board and I'm going to say a fairly small group of federal agencies met very regularly over the next 10 years to draft and publish draft regulation notices and then get the industry feedback and make changes based on that feedback. And I'm not supposed to talk about anything in great detail of what we talked about in there, but a couple of the topics are that we talked about a big change in the refresh standards was that it was made very clear that things like electronic documents were in scope in the Section 508 standards for federal agencies. And that's a huge change. Previously, it was primarily just websites. But if you think about it, if you have a website and there's 1,000 documents on it, and great, the page is accessible, but none of the documents are, how much good are you really doing? But if you think about it from the website owner's perspective, now you're talking 1,000 times more work. And so a lot of discussion was had to scope that requirement to something that's doable, achievable, and actually improves accessibility for people with disabilities. So that was one of them. And the other one was moving to harmonize with the Europeans and others' accessibility standards to adopt the World Wide Web Consortium Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Those guidelines are called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines for a reason, because they're focused on content and they're focused on web content. The board wanted to apply them to web, to mobile apps, to desktop, to documents. And so a lot of discussion took place on how to do that so that we weren't trying to apply something that didn't match. And the outcome was that we did exempt 4 of the WCAG success criteria for things like documents. And we had to do a little bit of inclusion of a little extra around things like mobile apps and software to try to make sure that things weren't applied inappropriately. That took a lot of work. Those are probably the 2 biggest ones. And I think all the people that worked on this over the literally 11 years did a remarkable job. There was a lot of energy throughout the whole process. The industry actually did a great job of providing feedback. And the final product, in my opinion, is a very good product that should last for quite a while. Those are the 2 big things that jumped out at me that just consumed the group for a long period of time.
That's a huge accomplishment. I think it's really valuable to see how much consideration and care it took to get Section 508 where it is today. So, reflecting on your time at various federal organizations, what's something that people in the private sector could learn from doing business in the government?
I think the biggest thing for me, and this is reflected from like one of the things that I worked on the most in my time in the government, was training IT professionals in a measurable way to do accessibility. IT professionals are not trained on accessibility if they go to university, they don't get it. If they go to tech schools, they don't get it. Their employers don't ask about it. And then so how do we think they're supposed to just do the work, understand what they're supposed to do, and then even understand the right ways to do it? For the most part, it's just thrown at them and it's like, oh, figure it out. Everybody go figure it out on your own. And so while I was in the government, we faced that problem of not only did in the government we have a large number of people developing applications and websites and such, but the turnover rate was high because we would hire companies to do the work and they didn't know what to do. And so we had to come up with a way to not only just provide the training, because just handing somebody the document that says, here, read all this, you'll be good, doesn't tell you if they really have the skills. And so we built what's called the Trusted Tester Program, which is a series of online trainings and a certification exam. And to be honest, it's hard. It's sort of meant to be hard so that people doing their work can be trusted with less oversight. And I think that's one of those concepts that could be moved into the industry even more than it is now. There are several similar things now going on out in industry. There's the International Association of Accessibility Professionals has certifications, and I think they're very good. There is another group called Teach Access, promoting including accessibility in educational settings. And then just as a local example for us, as DQ University has an extremely good set of trainings that people can take to get them moving in the right direction. If you don't understand what you're going to do, then I don't really know how people expect people to get it done.
Right. There's always opportunity to keep learning once you're in a job. As you mentioned in your blog post on Section 508, building accessibility programs requires a culture change. What are some of the best drivers for culture change do you find in your experience?
Well, before I give the big 3, just remember that culture change is a journey. It's not a sprint. You can't just change the way people think about and do things. It's not command and control. It just takes time. Change management is something that takes time. And there's good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. So for me, the 3 drivers that I always jump on first is empathy, understanding, and opportunity. The first thing in the empathy is that you have to get, and I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, get senior leaders. They want to feel what it's like for people with disabilities to use their products. Once people understand and can feel like the frustration level of trying to use a product that's inaccessible, it's a natural thing to have empathy and be motivated to say, well, let's make that better because this isn't really good. Our product doesn't look good when it doesn't work. And then after you get those leadership buy-in, then you need to take that down to the bottoms up sort of approach of the people doing the work also. Everybody has to get that. That's a motivation. The next part is understanding. And this comes back to the training. People doing the work need to understand what is expected in accessibility and ways to get it done. If it's all just a mystery, then they're not going to accept that they should be doing it. They're not going to know that they can do it. And so it's always going to be put to the bottom of the pile. And the last thing is, for me, is opportunity. And this is sort of like an industry change from doing the 5-year waterfall method of producing things to a more agile or DevOps way of producing products. The more opportunities people have to make accessibility changes, the more confident they become in doing it, and the more they can see that they've gotten done, and then that motivates them even more. So those are my first three things. And a couple other things that come along with this is that measuring your progress as an organization, thinking about ways that you can see how that culture change is working is really important to sustaining the effort. You run around for rah 6 months and you all find out that your products are inaccessible and some people take training, but how do you know if you're making any progress? If you don't measure it, then you don't. It's a guess. And then along with measuring your progress, one of the strategies that I'll say, I don't know if this is the driver, but it's a strategy to drive that change, to get competition amongst those senior leaders. Share reports with them where they can see different subcomponents of an organization's progress. They don't like to be last, or they don't even like to be, if it's a red, yellow, green report, nobody likes to see red on their section. So measuring and competition can go hand in hand and can sustain that progress that you build with the other three.
Well said. And I think the mix here too is really key because people inevitably have different motivators, and what works well for one person to get them motivated and to help them contribute to that broader culture change might not be the same for another person. So having different strategies, as you reference, different methods, I think you'll see the best results there. Okay, so last question for you, Alan. What are you excited about for the future of accessibility?
Well, there's me for my selfish reasons, and then there's just a broader general, and I'll start with the general ones. In the 90s, I operated a small internet hosting business, and we started where we put two dial-up modems bridged together and ran a website on that. Today, my fiber that comes into my house has more bandwidth than thousands of those modems. And that opens up a lot of opportunities for people with disabilities to do remote work, to do for blind people, and I'm sure for others, having someone remote help you out at home. So you, for example, just doing a video like a FaceTime call, and you say, hey, can you help me find that can of soup? Or what does this say? That broadband enables that. It doesn't, it doesn't seem obvious that that's a big difference, but in the 90s, having something like video conferencing was not very good. As we move from researching machine learning and artificial intelligence to applying it, what comes out of that is showing that it can be a great help for people with disabilities, because what it does is it lowers the cost of things that we had to have people to help us with down to, zero in a lot of cases. So, for example, having a GPS app that tells you how to navigate from one place to another is a huge difference. And this may not even be necessarily just for people with disabilities. That's always one of the premises that accessibility is for everyone. But just knowing that you can go somewhere and always get back because the GPS will take you back, that's huge. Having voice activated products that you just ask it questions, it goes and figures it out and actually just tells you the answers, that's huge. And then the last one is, and this is like a really recent one, is as the pandemic has pushed online learning, I expect we'll find it's not working as well as we want, because historically, online learning has been a huge accessibility challenge due to the volume of content and the training of the people making the content. Your average teacher, they didn't teach them how to make their content accessible. So they're not going to know how when we start. But over time, that move to online and pushing accessibility in there, because it's a have to have, will result in a huge change in the quality of the accessibility in the education of people with disabilities across the board. So those three things jump out at me immediately. On a selfish note, I'm desperately waiting for self-driving cars because I'm blind, so they don't like me to drive. That's probably the biggest one for me. Where's my Tesla? As soon as that thing is ready for me to get in by myself and go somewhere, I'm getting one. Currently, accessibility is sort of defined as a big long set of success criteria. There's like 60 of them, or I know the number's wrong, but there's a lot of them. And then we have to train people, and each one of them may in and of itself be written in a short way, but each one of them has a huge amount of detail that goes with it. And it's a lot to train people on. I have a hope for two things. One is I'm hoping machine learning will help deliver increased sort of guidance as people build products to help them do their accessibility right without having to do that huge lift up front to do the training. DQ's product calls that intelligent guided accessibility testing. And the other side of that is I'm hopeful that in the next round of the standards that there's a way to simplify them in one way or another so that the lift is less. I just don't know if we can continue to keep adding more and more requirements. They may be perfectly good requirements, but there's kind of a point of diminishing returns for people trying to do the work and address every single one. So I'm hoping that the machine learning sort of real-time guidance for people as they build products can close one end, and maybe standard simplification can close the other end.
Absolutely. And I think you make an excellent point that in the case of the pandemic, for example, it's a remarkable challenge that we're all facing right now, but it can also be an opportunity for areas of growth and improvement in training, in online learning, and more advances that will help the accessibility community and the broader community of learners and students and anybody using that technology. Well, Alan, thank you so much for participating in this. I really appreciate taking time and providing your insights into the accessibility field and some really interesting history around Section 508 in particular.
All righty, well, thank you.